Finishing up on the SHP stroker engine, small block Chevrolet. This is an aftermarket block, obviously, and first thing I always do is you always want to check the seal dimension, make sure that the housing bore for the seal is the right size. If you happen to have one that has a little larger seal diameter, the seal is going to leak, and they make an oversized seal for it. So we're just going to torque up the bolts. The clearances are all good. We're 3.3 on the back. We're 3, 3, 3, 2 and 7/10. So crank's all set to go. We'll torque her up. Got the end plate set already. This cap is pretty much tight now. Just going through it and making sure that it is torqued properly. Yeah, we're bouncing off the... Okay, we're putting the pistons in the SHP small block Chevrolet stroker engine. I'll go over a few things with you. I'm not going to bore you with putting all the pistons in. I've got this side just about done. But I'll go over a few things that may help some people. This, because it's an aftermarket steel forged crank engine, it has larger fillets on the crank. And what that requires is either a narrowed or a chamfered bearing. And most of the time they're called H bearings. And if they're narrowed, they'll be an HN bearing, which means race type bearing, and it will be an N for narrowed. This applies to any engine that has a aftermarket large fillet crankshaft. Don't matter if it's a Chevy, Pontiac, Ford, don't matter. There'll be a position for the top bearing, and there'll be a position for the bottom bearing. This one says lower on it. You probably can't see it, but it says lower, and this is an upper. You want to make sure that the upper goes in the upper and the lower goes into the lower part of the cap of the rod. The reason being is because the crankshaft has a larger fillet area. The rods are usually cut for that and the bearings narrowed. So we'll put the bearing in. This is the upper. And before we get into it, I always wipe the back of the bearing off in the housing board lacquer. Okay. You can see how much area there is for the fillet to be bigger on the crankshaft. And this would be the cheek part of the crank. This is the part that goes up against the counterweight. The crank isn't cut straight across because the fillet area increases the strength of the crank. So we're going to torque this rod together, and then I will check each single rod for clearance, and then we'll put them in. Okay, I always cut my rings when the deck plate is on the engine in the home. That's the last operation that I do. And when I assemble the engine, I check the end gaps just to make oil ring orientation. This is going to be the oil ring expander, expansion rail. We're going to put the oil rails on it. The oil spacer rail for the piston, because the pin goes through the piston, I've got it positioned right where my thumb is. I put my thumb over the oil expander rail, and I put the rings on. I'm going to try to do it so you can see me doing it, which doesn't work out very well, but you can see. Putting your thumb on it keeps it from overlapping. That's why I paint them. You want to make sure that that doesn't overlap. This is a kind of a Hastings oil ring rail. Them are kind of hard to overlap. Some of the other manufacturers are more easily done. So that's, and they sometimes have a paint mark on them. So we've got the position here for the end of the oil ring rail, and then that one. I'm in with the spacer rail and the oil ring spacer the same place. You can clock them 180. You can do whatever you want. It don't really matter a lot. This is only going to go in two ways. It's going to go either up front or back. And I always check to make sure that the spiral locks are correct and it's not missing any. And I just take a little O-ring tool like that and I just push on them. If you push on it and it goes down, you better check, because you probably are missing an oil or a spiral lock. And you don't want to do it when the oil ring rail spacer's in. It's pretty much, you got to take that back off. And this comes off, but it's not really a fun job to do. So we'll get this sorted out here in a minute. I just got to hook onto it and slide it down. Right about there. Make sure she's fully seated. And my little dent is right here. So that little dent, I don't know if you can see it. Let me see if I can show you. See that little dent there? That's the way it's got to be. And because I got paint on these, I can put them in, and basically what that does is that makes it easier to see, and you won't overlap it. Well, the oil ring rails are usually on most all piston kits you get are extremely dirty. You want to make sure you wash them. And all these rings have been ground for end gap because they're fitted rings, and they've been washed. And I wipe them before I put them in the engine again. So we'll put that one on, the bottom one first. Usually your thumb over the end gap of the oil spacer rail, it helps. And I usually put the one here and one there, opposing each other, and clock them if they're off a little bit. That's not a precise measurement, but as long as they're pretty much like that, that's where I put them. Okay, so we're going to put our second ring in first, after the oil rings. This is the second ring. We're going to visually check it. I've been doing this long enough. I know if it's got clearance or don't. And that looks to be pretty close to what I want. So we know that this ring has been gapped. Okay, some rings, most all rings, the second ring will have a mark on it. It'll have a dent on it. It'll have a top, sometimes printed on it. It'll have a letter on it. But I mark them with a little bit of red paint. Don't hurt nothing. It's easy to see. It releases all doubt in your mind of whether or not you have the rings in properly. Now the top ring does not necessarily have to have a dent on it, depending on what the ring is. There's different types of rings. Now this ring has a dent on it, or a spot indicating that it goes up. And they can say top, and they can have a letter stamped on them, but anything that has a mark on it should go up. If it has no mark on the top ring, that means it's a barrel-faced ring. It can go any which way. It can go in this way, it can go in that way. It don't matter. This just makes my job easier to mark this stuff, and I'll show you how efficient it is. You can see that very clearly. You can see that very clearly. And you can see the second ring very clearly. It's right there. It's hard to see some of the times this with oil on it. So that's why I do it. Okay, so all the pistons are in this side of the engine now, except the last one, and I'm about ready to put that one in. With a small block usually, depending on what head it has on it, but pretty much most all small blocks. And common port is center exhaust. So your two exhaust valves are going to be facing side by side. Okay, a lot of people don't like these type of ring compressors. They work fairly well. You gotta use a fair amount of, I use a fair amount of oil on them. If the rings are smaller than 1/16 rings, you gotta, I use quite a bit of oil. It seems to help. You also have to look and see where your oil ring rails are in position. You don't want none of them falling through the gap in the band. So you don't want any of your rings to land in this gap. As far as the cylinder walls go, how I prep them, I wash them down with lacquer thinner a couple times. Then I take a white rag and I use regular motor oil. Guys use many different things. This is what I use. This is how I build them. This works for me. I know guys use ATF and whatnot. I keep wiping the walls down until the towel comes back clean. When the towel comes back clean, the walls are clean. So I'm going to position this way. There's a bottom on this. I'm going to put it down this way. You want to make sure you do that. Now this ring compressor is just a little bit smaller than the bore, but it fits around the piston nice and tight. Now, so this band here is just a little bit smaller. The bigger one doesn't fit as tight as this one, and that can give you some problems. But other than that, I've been using this tool for 30 years and I haven't had a problem with it. You just got to be careful. It takes a little time. But, you know, if you're doing a lot of different bores like I am, you know, you can buy tapered sleeves, but I'm just setting my ways. This works fine. You don't want to beat the pistons in. You don't want to slam them. You want to make sure that everything is going good. And that's what I mean, good. You slam them in, you can break a ring, you can screw up some stuff, and really, it's just, you don't have to be brutal with them. So we got the Stroker SHP small block together, and this one I'm just going to short block for the time being. I think the customer is going to pick up a better set of heads. Got a pretty hot camshaft for it, but have to check all that, and this is about as far as I'm going to go with it. I'll be doing a 283 and then probably the two 383s. Probably going to start on the 383, one of them quite soon. I just have to check it for clearance and assemble the bottom end. One has E-heads on it, the other one has profiler heads. Well, thank you for watching.